the evening. Thank you for coming. Please help yourself to food and drinks and tea. And feel free to move around as you'd like during the conversation this evening. A pretty small and cozy group this evening, so I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to have direct conversation about specific sites or questions or topics people are coming with this evening. Try to get the feedback. Okay. So please speak up. So just to give you an overview of the evening, my name is Olivia. I work with the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. I'm a planner, and a lot of what I do is natural resources work, and we work a lot with municipalities and trying to help figure out how to look forward and plan for the future, and stormwater and dealing with the floods and water quality and everything that goes with it is one of those areas. So, thank you, Ian. So I'm going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to dive into the panel. We have some really great folks here tonight, a lot of experience to bring to bear on this topic. And then Loosigian is going to provide a presentation really about specific projects that can be done at the residential scale. And then we can more conversation. Hopefully, I guess that's a quick question. Where are people coming from this evening? Like, who's coming from Claremont? Yeah, good number. Other towns, Unity, I know I heard Unity. Other towns people are coming from? Charlestown, Sunapee, Cornish. Weathersfield, another Vermonter in here. Anyone else? So really good mix tonight. So thank you for coming. Is there anyone coming tonight with a site that they're thinking about and has specific questions about that site? One.
I have 2 sites.
You have 2 sites. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we can help you. I hope we can work on that. So I'll dive into the overview. Thank you. So this is probably a lot of information that might not be new to you, but I just want to lay the foundation. So when water falls in the ground, right, it's kind of like a tub. It has its watershed or its catchment, and all of the water that falls in that area and then flows eventually, quickly, or slowly down to an exit point. In this case, the catchment or watershed goes to the ocean. Eventually, right, all of our water goes to the ocean. That's the end point.
That's probably too dark.
That's
So there.
That's good.
That's good. Looks good.
Good? Thank you. And one of the things you can see on this map is different types of land uses. Homes and roads, dams, factories, runoff, if there's snow in the higher elevation or more northern areas, farms, forests, all of these things play an impact. And what happens uphill affects what happens downhill. It's not just what happens in the stream that's going to decide how much water is flowing in that stream and what's the quality of that water. Every single point in that watershed has an impact, which is part of the impetus for this conversation tonight, because once you get to a point, it gets harder and harder to intervene as it moves downhill. So when it falls onto the ground, it has a couple places it can go. It can go off, downhill, be surface runoff. The other places it can go where we would like it to go is into the soil. When there is space, when there is airspace in the soil, it can move into those airspaces and move down, and eventually some of that can go into the groundwater. Now some of that will eventually also go into the streams, but it tends to go a lot more slowly as it meanders and moves through all of the soil pores in the water, in the soil, and things like the plants and the root zone, that's what you're seeing here, has a big effect on like what kind of airspace you have within those soils. So all of these things are really connected in that, right? The storage capacity then affects how much runoff you might get. So a little bit of science, I apologize, on the graphs. lot of it is going into the surface runoff area. The yellow area is base flow groundwater flow, and that's mostly the water that's coming through the soil and slowly moving through, and some of that can be carried over from previous storms. The more you get to go into the ground, obviously the larger the yellow part is, and it subdues that peak, and we can work on some of that flashiness. There are some things we can control, right? We can't control the amount of water that's falling, where it falls, how intense it falls. I think this is something on people's minds this summer, and it's all over the news. New Hampshire tourism businesses feel impacts of summer heavy rains. Major disaster declaration for July flooding in 5 counties. Dock swallowed as Lake Sunapee rises, and these were only a few, and I'm sure everyone has a story in this room of what's going on. And this is just the flooding part of it, right? There's a lot of other things that are going on when this happens. Property damage, water quality, et cetera, et cetera. There are some things that we can control or we can at least influence. The type of land use that's on the land is going to have a big impact on what can infiltrate into that land. So if it's the images on the left, the top one, right, the difference between a forest and impervious surface. Let's assume this is concrete, not going to let anything flow through it on the right, and a forest that might have a lot of potential storage capacity. So it's going to be able to do more in terms of taking in some of that and also slowing it. On the bottom, you're kind of seeing more of a grassland instead of that impervious. Now that does have does allow some infiltration, but not as much as a forest. So there's a lot of gradients there. And the other thing that's a factor is roughness, or that slowing down. So on the right, there's an image. You just got kind of a slough. It's like if you were a kid going down a slide and you want to go as quickly as possible. Well, that's pretty much what the water does, and it gets down as quickly. And sometimes that's what you need, and that's okay. And sometimes, if we have the opportunity to build in some texture, make it go on a longer path, that's going to give it an opportunity to soak it and infiltrate potentially, but also just get a little slower down to the road and accumulate over time. That can reduce a peak and have an impact over a large area. Another thing is location. That's not really what we're talking about much tonight, but a big influence of things like regulations and zoning and site decisions that landowners and contractors are a part of. And so that is another thing that we work on, but is not the main part of the topic this evening. So one of the things we did before this event as part of the Regional Planning Commission is we talked with directors and road agents from across the region. We were able to, there are 27 municipalities in our region, and we spoke with 17 departments from Lebanon to Ackworth and Unity, from a variety of sizes and challenges they're facing. And we have some copies of that, and I'm happy to discuss it with folks. But a few things that stood out to me, I think at least for this conversation this evening, was one, they feel a lot of support from their communities in terms of the funding that communities are able to provide at that level to be able to do the work as best they can do within the budgets and the staffing that they have. So a lot of great support, and that was really nice to hear. Because they're typically working really, really hard. 67% of them, 2/3, said that standard at this point are all upsizing culverts. If they have an opportunity to replace or funding, they are increasing the size of those structures that are going under roads, that are going under trails to carry more water. That also does help to to slow the flow and to make it function better for streams. If they're the right size, it's going to function better for a variety of factors. So that's really good, as well as keeping the road safe. When asked to grade their local system, So the best one person said they felt like they were fit for the future. They felt like their system could decently handle the storms that they might expect coming. And they're basing this on their experience and what they're seeing from the storms, and know that it's getting worse. They're seeing worse storms. 47% felt like historically, based on historical storms, they're doing okay. They're mostly keeping up, making some improvements. Everyone has problem areas, but mostly they're doing okay, but there are quite a lot of concerns in terms of the future and how they're going to be able to keep up moving forward. And quite a number who felt like there was some significant attention needed, and one feeling they were really at risk. And sometimes it was different parts of the town. But concern there, right? There was concern there, even with funding available now. There's not really enough ultimately to do everything. So we've got to think creatively as well. So 88% said funding, biggest challenge. I'm sure our panelists and other speakers will speak more to this as well, but co-benefits, water quality, water runs off, it's not filtered, it's going to carry pollutants. Replenishing the groundwater, even though we're getting a lot of rain, we're also having more periods of drought. A lot of us live on wells, public water supplies. I know Claremont has a number of the source water protection plans for some of its areas in town. It's really important to think about. Of course, that's surface water, but there's also the groundwater rights. The more we infiltrate, we're trying to keep what falls in the ground as well. The cost to the community, again, if we wait till it gets to the end point, typically it's probably more expensive. So as much as we can capture it along the way, ultimately I think it's going to have a cost reduction overall. Now how we get there, where we have multiple people who are responsible for different lands, that's a coordination. And I think that's part of what we're hoping to start having conversations about how we can do more that are collaborative. Recreation economy, obviously very important in this area. So we want to keep that strong. Ecosystem health, public health, all of these things are interconnected. And again, that cross-sector collaboration is an opportunity there. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned, but so we're going to dive in a moment into the panel discussion, and then we'll have a conversation about possible solutions on smaller properties, small lands. Continue our resource fair for folks who have questions, and direct conversation with some really great resources that we have here tonight, and talk about some specific sites and what we can do, different partners that are here tonight. There's also, I encourage people to look at the map that's on the mirror over there. We are trying to do more planning, regional planning on this topic. We get information from municipalities, but we also want to hear from other folks that are seeing concerns, but also seeing opportunity in their community. So please, talk to me. Feel free to talk to me directly, but also put something on the map, write it down. We have some funding, and we're trying to get more, and so that input's really helpful to helping us figure out, get funding and do those projects. So I'll pass it off to the panel. DeForest first with the City of Claremont is going to moderate, and then we have 3 panelists who are with us tonight. LaCasse is with EJ Prescott, Rhodes with Connecticut River Conservancy, and Tim Hernon is with the Recreation Department here in Claremont. So I'm going to get the chair set up and let them take it away.
So good evening.
Thank you everyone for coming. Again, I'm DeForest. I'm the planner for the city of Claremont. We have a very qualified panel tonight to answer some canned questions, if you will, and then we'll take questions from everyone else. And just to reintroduce, we have Ron. Sorry, I did my notes. We have Ron Rhodes from the Connecticut River Conservancy. Zach LaCasse from EJ Prescott, and our own Tim Hernon from the City of Claremont Parks and Recreation Department. So how this is going to work, I'm going to ask each of you a question that we already have planned out here. Answer to the best of your ability, or share something that you feel is more appropriate, and then we'll take on the next question. So, if you could, we'll start with you, Ron. If you could tell everybody about a project you've done related to rainwater.
Sure, I don't need a mic, I'm loud. This year, we just finished a dam removal and culvert replacement project in Wilmington, Vermont. So town-owned culvert with a privately owned dam. We had probably 6 different funding sources, including state, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We had some foundation funding that was sort of flood resiliency focused. And then, of course, our members and our donors contribute to these projects also. Collaboration with, whole big list of partners. We don't do any of this work by ourselves. But the co-benefits was already mentioned in the intro, where part of the funding was for fish passage, right? It was a wild brook trout stream, so the fisheries agencies were all about the brook trout. You can't get, what's my favorite dad joke? What did the fish say when it ran into the wall? Dam. So, right, hard to get upstream if you have a dam in the way, if you're a little brook trout. But the town cared about the culvert part of the project because it flooded in Tropical Storm Irene. And that road, it's the only way in and out, that road was cut off. Everybody that lives up Hall Road was stranded for, I think they said 3 days. And the town came in and sort of fixed it. It wasn't even a culvert, it was an old tank of some sort that they threw in there and put concrete around, as a quick fix. 12 years later, we came back in and fixed it. And it was a 4-foot wide culvert that couldn't pass a 100-year flood in Irene, right? We put in a 40-foot long bridge. So we have 10 times the capacity. So when we talk about upsizing culverts and future costs to our communities, right? Our community budgets, yes, it costs more up front, but with all those partners involved, the town didn't spend any money on it. We had all of that whole bridge, that whole construction was completely funded. So the town used some trucking, they contributed to the cost, but they didn't have to go to the voters and say, we need $180,000 for this project. So that partnership is really key. And they're just very rewarding projects.
It sounds wonderful. I think there were lots of people got stranded this summer when roads got washed out under similar circumstances that weren't ready for that volume of water. Zach, how about you?
Yeah, so this is actually, I don't know if everyone hear me? This is actually a project we're working on right now. It's a VE project, so value engineering opportunity, kind of a design build. This is actually in Lewiston, Auburn, city, it's in Maine. And same thing, they were dealing with flooding, really severe flooding this whole summer. Pictures of cars underwater, stuff like that. I'm sure we've all seen that this summer. They are putting together a design for similar to what they're doing in Back Bay in Portland right now, a CSO storage unit. They have a shared stormwater and sewer system right now. So what happens when there's a ton of rain coming into that system, it becomes overwhelms, and then eventually that untreated stormwater and sewer ends up in the Androscoggin River. So similar, they're upsizing pretty much every main culvert to 48 inches. That's all going to run into separate water quality structures. So what that's going to do, it's going to be some sort of bioretention unit or hydrodynamic separator, which will treat that stormwater, remove any pollutants that would, possibly make it into the Androscoggin River, and then it will have a place for at least 2 million gallons worth of stormwater or sewage to sit there, be stored there before it eventually gets treated. So we're avoiding discharging anything into the Androscoggin River. So
That's excellent. I know a lot of cities are still struggling with stormwater
It's-
separation.
yeah, and so
Very
MS
costly, but
100%. So yeah.
Tim, how about you?
So 10 years ago, when this facility that we're in today was being constructed, the footprint for this building is 32,000 square feet. It's a pretty large space in addition to the parking lot. So part of the project was to do underground water treatment for the roof and the parking lot. And I've only seen it come out of the overflow from that treatment area on one storm. But there was concern for localized flooding to neighbors that were down Tyler Brook and other areas because there's a potential of a lot of water coming off of the Arrowhead hillscape. So it was a huge plus for us, and it's been a benefit. So that water's going back in the ground.
So that water's going into the groundwater?
Mm-hmm. Right underneath the parking lot, everybody's parked who drove here. Yep. And the discharge for the overflow is on the other side of that bridge as it goes by.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Okay, back to you. What challenges do you see with rainwater flows, especially across boundaries?
Cross boundaries. Political boundaries?
Well, it could be property boundaries.
Property boundaries,
I'm sure
yeah.
you've all got stories of somebody's property causing problems on someone else's.
So for us, as a watershed group, a nonprofit organization, right, we work with towns, farmers, a lot of farmers who have erosion problems, businesses, golf course, we've done a lot of golf course projects. Any private landowner that lives on the Connecticut River, the Sugar River, or any of the tributaries, right, that whole watershed. The challenge, I think the biggest hurdle, there's funding out there, especially now with all the federal money, right? The bill and the ARPA and like all these acronyms, but there's tons, millions of federal dollars. We just run on a call today with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're going to sign a cooperative agreement with them to do 3 years worth of culvert project in Pondicherry, so northern New Hampshire, and Mohegan, northern Vermont. And great partnership, and we're probably going to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 on these projects. But if you're like a local homeowner and you've got a culvert in your driveway, that's a big challenge. Is it a brook trout stream? Probably not, right? It's probably a smaller stream. Are there federal or state funding sources to help with that driveway culvert? A lot harder to make the case. And so there are hundreds of thousands of culverts in our watershed, right, that need to be replaced or upsized. And those specific driveway culverts are the real challenge. And it's not cheap, right? You're going to spend probably $30,000 just in engineering and permitting, and then another, $50,000 on a culvert maybe. Because you're not talking about 48-inch culverts, you're talking about bigger culverts. So finding that money for those particular set of projects is a real
It's
challenge.
a challenge, yeah. How about you, Zane?
Yeah, I think honestly, what I've seen a lot of is just like increased development, kind of like the adverse effects you see from that. For example, we were talking about, you see a lot of big solar projects going on in Maine right now. The DEP, by law, they're, these big developers are only supposed to clear 5 acres at a time, but they'll eat that fee and they'll clear all 40 acres at a time. Well, when you clear 40 acres of what was forest, you really change the hydraulic cycle. So all of that water that was getting into the ground is now flowing off site. A lot of cases, if it's close to a waterway, it's discharging sediment into that waterway. One case that we've dealt with was, a neighbor was getting, they had a culvert that was going right into a brook, and a lot of that turbidity, a lot of that dirty water was actually overwhelming the culvert and spilling up onto their driveway. And it was just a back and forth battle. That's just solar. We're just seeing more and more development everywhere in Maine. You know, there's more people coming into Maine looking to build houses and or, you know, subdivisions. So just being responsible with the way we do develop and making sure we are, you know, containing our sites and getting water back into the ground as best we can. So, yeah.
So for me in Parks and Recreation, I've got a couple of large playing surfaces, one at Monadnock Park, the other at Barnes Park. Barnes Park is adjacent to a small neighborhood behind that local elementary school, but on a heavy rainstorm, that water has nowhere to go. It rolls across, I think it's Shannon Street or I can't remember the street name, but then on the Barnes Park field and then down through Barnes Park parking lot. So those are things that involve, you know, planning and development and trying to get the right size structure that would capture that water in a big storm. A smaller rainstorm is fine, but that's something, you know, we're looking at doing it, working with our other departments. In Monadnock Park, that's a 25-acre park that's only about 2.5 feet above the Sugar River. So when we do get a lot of rain, like we have this summer, and it rained 8 inches, averaged about 8 inches every month from April to this month. Unfortunately, it all came down in 1.5 or 2 inch chunks at a time. But fortunately, at this point, you know, the ground's pretty well saturated, can absorb it when it's dry after a 5-year drought. We had a lot of issues with just water runoff and not being able to capture it and use it because the ground was so dry. We were able to use a chemical surfactant to a test for a field, and we applied it, and you know, the cost was around $800 for the product and the application by the certified applicator. But our irrigation bill for the track field is about $3,000 to $5,000 a year. We were able to not have to irrigate it, so it was a great test case to see what we could do and see if we could capture some water, hold on to it. That's what that product did. It held it in the soil so that the roots could then take it from the soil and it wouldn't just run off.
Nice.
So we like it.
Nice. That's awesome.
And when you're paying for water, that's a big plus.
Well, as a planner too, I see lots of projects all the time, and certainly managing runoff is a big component of the approval process to make sure that we're not sending water where it shouldn't go.
Right.
And as obviously a lot of larger projects mean introducing impervious surfaces, so those drainage systems and drainage engineering becomes very important. I did get a complaint this summer from someone who, at the bottom of the hill, was taking everybody else's runoff, and that he was channeling it onto someone else's land. It took some engineering to fix that, but there was no one person that was causing the problem. It was just where you were on the hill, and it all ended up in somebody else's place. So, okay, this is a loaded question. How do you see climate change impacting your day-to-day?
Job security. I mean, I always say we have a lifetime of work ahead of us, right? Between dams and culverts and erosion issues and planting trees. We spend all spring and all fall planting trees along the eroding stream banks, right? So it's just more of the same, right? More July flooding, more projects that have come out of that storm. Just like, again, we just this summer are doing projects that came out of Irene 12 years ago, right? So it's taking that long. One of the other challenges, there's only so many engineering firms, right? We've got a handful here in New Hampshire, we've got a couple in Maine and Mass that we hire occasionally, and we've got some in Vermont. They're all full. They're all trying to hire engineers because their plates are full. Contractors, same way, right? You could try to hire someone to come do a project, and they're looking at their calendar going, yeah, maybe next year. Yeah, maybe.
Right.
So all the money in the system and all these projects that have been created by the storms have really created a bit of a bottleneck. And I think that's going to be just continue to be a challenge for us is climate change.
I'd like to digress just a second. I've heard you speak about damage from Irene, which was 12 years ago. Are you seeing the same places affected in this past summer?
Some cases.
That were affected by Irene?
Yeah.
I know some places in Vermont, the same places got hit again.
Yeah.
And now the question is arising, do I really want to rebuild here, or do I want to do something different? But
Yes, and so like Ludlow, Vermont and Woodstock, Vermont got hammered again, right? I live near Woodstock. Now, the silver lining is some folks have learned, like this Shake Shack, right? If you want to go get ice cream in Woodstock on Route 4, they got hammered in Irene. They were smart and they put all their electrical stuff up on the roof. So they got flooded this time in July, but they were only closed for like 2 weeks instead of all summer because all their electronics were safe. So they had to do a little cleanup, a little mud, you know, but they were back open. So I think that's all these culverts being upsided. You know, that's sort of a result of Irene, right? The
I guess
new
that's the question,
standards.
did we learn anything?
Yeah, we seem to have sort of the silver lining is that, you know, a lot of towns, like my town, God bless them, we had some local event that blew out a culvert. I forget what size, let's say it was a 48-inch culvert, right? And we spent $60,000 put in the same culvert. Unfortunately, it was like 2 months before Irene. Irene came, blew out the culvert, blew out the road, cost us $260,000. We could have spent half of that and put in a bigger culvert and it would have survived, right? So it's that penny wise, pound foolish, like we're always so concerned about this budget instead of the long-term budget. And if we could take that longer view and say, let's spend a little more now and it's going to save us, like Olivia had on the chart, right? It's going to save us money down the road.
Thanks, how about you, Zach?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, with a warmer climate, we're basically just like supercharging the water cycle, right? So with 1 degree of Fahrenheit, 1 degree more in Fahrenheit in the atmosphere, it holds about 2.5%, 4% more water, right? So we've seen at least 10% more storage in water in our atmosphere in the last 50 years, right? So with warming climate, we're only supercharging, you know, the water cycle. We're seeing more and more intense, you know, rain, obviously this summer. So I would say we probably are just going to have to start spending more money for permanent fixes. Ludlow, we did a couple projects with geocellular confinement for roadways. So basically, you put your aggregate inside of this system that holds the aggregate, and it also makes sure that it doesn't get compacted. So it's kind of like a pervious pavement in a type of way. Did they have to spend a little bit more money? Definitely, but now they're not going to have to worry about, you know, their camp roads blowing out every single time it rains. You know, a lot of people don't want to spend all that money on their camp road, but the other option would be rebuild it every single time, you know, you get an intense rainfall. So,
Pennywise, pound.
right.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah.
Tim?
So for me, it's a matter of just picking where we're gonna work next. So if I've got a rainfall event and I can't mow a field, then I'll go somewhere else. There's always a list of things to do in our department. We did, like the Shake Shack, when the flood of 2005 came, when we were doing the field lighting project in Monadnock Park, we did put our transformer above the high water mark, and that again survived in this past July. So it only cost me an inspection with the contractor to open the disconnects and say they're dry, they're not corroded, and that was easy. So that was, you know, it was kind of forward thinking.
What role do residents and small businesses have in managing rainwater? For example, volunteering, notifying problem areas, managing on private lands?
Well, I'm a private landowner, and we try to do what we can, and there's some examples over there. Rain barrels, stormwater, you know, gardens, if you want to call them that. I mean, businesses, obviously, you have rain gardens, and then the businesses are creating the stormwater runoff areas. You know, is that required? No. Is it a good idea? Yeah. So again, sort of investing a little bit of money up front to, you know, give you peace of mind, right? I mean, if you live anywhere near flowing water, or even maybe even ponds and lakes in some cases, right? I would think you would be planning for that type of future, right? That there's a, I forget what the stat is, but the 100-year flood is the worst term ever created, right? Because we've all seen it doesn't happen once every 100 years. It's happened twice in the last 12 years. And if you go back and look at the dates, it's like happened like 8 times in the last 100 years that we've had that big of a storm in our sort of local Upper Valley, region. So is it going to happen again? Yeah. Probably in the next decade or less. I mean, so preparing for that and buying a rain barrel or creating a rain garden seems like a smart move.
Yeah, I think that to kind of go off that, those are some really inexpensive ways to like do your part. A rain garden, vegetated buffer. Basically, the whole idea of that is, recreating or enhancing natural processes, right? Getting the water back in the ground. And I think another big thing is if there is some sort of system in your community, or you are a business owner and there is already a system there, there's a lot of like maintenance that comes with all these things, or just paying attention, making sure things are clear of debris, and just doing, keeping an eye out. So, be familiar with all the systems that are in your, region, in your town, in your city, and just making sure you're keeping an eye on them and making sure they're, working how they're supposed to be. Would go a pretty long way, I think. So. Yeah.
The story I told earlier about the person at the bottom of the hill that was channeling his runoff onto his neighbor's land, his neighbor had a family cemetery where all this water was sitting.
Yeah.
So it was traumatic for the,
right.
for the receiver.
Yeah.
It took some engineering to fix
Yeah.
that problem.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times you see, like, I don't know if you guys know those like silt sacks that you put in catch basins that, maybe one was forgotten, it's been there for a while, and it's just full of, sediment. It did its job, but it hasn't been maintained, or no one's been paying attention to it, so, just keeping an eye out and stuff like that.
So the thing that I think events like this we're doing tonight were very helpful to get the word out, to educate people, because when you look around this building, in my nearest park, there's probably 100 homeowners who, if they could do something that is low cost and easy to do, even if it's just aerating their fields or making sure that their water is, you can make a small French drain and keep that water in at a low cost, that would be key. Because all of the water, I live at the bottom, from Manhattan Park, I live at the bottom of the hill where all that water goes. And so there's a local farmer who has a hard time growing in 5 acres of his field because it's saturated. We're so flat where the river is that he can't use 5 acres of his field. So.
We're going to shift gears just a little bit. I'm going to ask each of you a specific question. I'll start with you, Tim. What do you wish the public understood about managing rainwater along roads or on public lands?
I think the cleanliness is key. Cars no longer put ashtrays in their vehicles anymore. And when you stop at a stoplight or a stop bar or a stop sign, we look over and you go, where's that going? It's going to Connecticut. Because that's the sad truth. You see things in big municipalities that can pay for a catch basin carpet that says drains to a waterway, don't dump oil or trash down here. Those are all key things that's a maintenance aspect that the city has to perform. A catch basin is a large structure that has a sump at the bottom that collects all the heavy material, whether it's dirt, soil, leaves, trash, but that has to be maintained on a regular basis because once that sump fills up, now that water can take whatever's in the bottom of that and take it out to the river. So, be cognizant of the fact that if you're throwing your McDonald's wrapper out the window on the road, that's where it's going to go eventually. And there aren't enough of us, in any department to do all this work every day. But we struggle to keep up with the resources that we're provided.
Zach, what are some of the low-hanging fruits to small landowners managing rainwater better? What are some of the biggest barriers?
Yeah. Again, I think, vegetated buffers, rain gardens. There's really good little booklet over there. I don't know whose booth that is, but yeah, there's a really awesome, installation guide to, if you are interested in, slowing down water, infiltrating into the ground. Because again, that does treat the water as well. That will take out all those pollutants, heavy metals, hydrocarbons, stuff like that. And I think one of the biggest barriers is just like education, outreach. You know, this is only a really small part of, you know, everyone in Claremont, obviously. So I think, you know, you have a certain amount of people who understand what's going on, and they're the ones who are involved, and they're going to be the ones building these rain gardens. And, you know, maybe they're kind of taking care of, you know, what's going on up top here, but like you said, maybe there's someone at the bottom of the stormwater conveyance who is kind of, you know, dealing with problems from other people, you know? So, yeah.
Just awareness, I think, is important. Be
100%.
aware of where your water is going.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not inadvertently channeling it onto someone else.
Right, 100%. And then, you know, if you are, there's obviously a lot of resources out there, a lot of people who will help you to, you know, do the right thing and fix that problem. So,
Be courteous of people.
yeah.
And Ron, what does rainwater have to do with conservation? Can you name a point of alignment and another point of friction?
Conservation, so I think of conservation, well, my job is restoration, right? So, you know, we're not a land trust, we're not doing sort of the conservation easement type work. I'm usually working with people who have a problem, an existing problem, as opposed to the conservation easement type of beforehand, before the problem comes. So we're often working with the farmer who has, you know, is losing 2-3 feet of their property every year, right? In the high water or maybe in the spring. Or a town who's got the culvert problem. So little different for us in that regard, that we're fixing problems, I guess is the way I think about it, which is rewarding, I would say. But yeah, conservation easements, buffer plantings, you know, if you're on water. And I guess, you know, just to riff off of what Tim said, like, and you mentioned it, like, what's the old saying? All, you know what, flows downhill. And here we are sort of at the bottom of the watershed on the Sugar River, right? So like the projects that we've done up in Goshen should matter down here in Claremont, right? And so it's not just our town or our neighborhood or our one stream, right? Like that is true, but it's a bigger watershed than that. And so if we start to think in that, because we're so siloed, right? Here we are in Claremont, town meets, you know, with Claremont residents, and how do we look at that regional scope, you know, that Olivia works on? And how do we start to connect our towns, because it's all the same water, it's all this, you know,
Right.
what they're doing up there should matter to us down here.
We're all connected. We know that in so many ways. Zach, about you?
Same question?
No. Yeah, DeForest. So last question. It's not a question. It's your opportunity to share a rant or rave about rainwater. And I'll start with you, Tim.
If someone can figure out how to make it stop when I don't need it, that would be great. Why can't it just rain at night?
Oh, I like that idea.
Yeah, that would be awesome. No, we deal with it on a regular basis because that's the majority of what I'm doing. I'm mowing grass, you know, anywhere from 10 to 16 acres a day for 5 days a week. And then when we throw a holiday in there, the grass doesn't take a holiday, so usually it's a part-time person that may want to come in and mow on a holiday during the growing season. I enjoy what I do. I think what we do provides a safe place with growing grass. Healthy grass is a safer playing environment for youth sports, for people to enjoy. It's putting oxygen back into the environment. It's buffering the runoff. It's, you know, all those things that we want to do. And we try and minimize what we do on our turf grass so that we don't have to put a lot of amendments to it, but we only put in what we need to, and we test our soils based on the soils report and a regular feeding program. Then we would put things down that we would need to make it be better.
Thanks. Zach, your turn to rant.
Yeah. As you know, detrimental as it's been this past year, there's a lot of really cool technology that is coming out. You know, so we can store, harness, put rainwater to a good use. You know, there's a lot of really cool bioretention, you know, rainwater channeling systems, irrigation. There's a lot of really awesome things we can do with rainwater, and I think that as people become more educated and it's, you know, talked about more and more, we'll see more of that implemented. So, it's exciting. Yeah.
And last but not least.
I'm gonna rave
Okay.
about willing partners, willing landowners, because all of this stuff that we're talking about, all that stuff that's over there is voluntary, right? So towns that are willing to go the extra step and to partner with a lot of different, whether it's nonprofits or state or federal agencies, regional planning commissions, to do this work, right? Landowners, like, we can't go do a dam removal or a buffer planting without willing landowners. And so someone's got to raise their hand and say, hey, I've got a problem, can someone help me? And the answer is generally yes, but getting people to raise their hand or to know the issues, right, to be educated enough to say, can someone help me? A lot of the farmers are tied in with the USDA and RCS, so they're working with a government agency and they maybe don't know all the programs, but someone will tell them. And so that's a somewhat easy connection for us, but there are private landowners or businesses, all of them down our watershed, the Sugar River included, that could use some help, and they just haven't, figured that out yet, right? Like, they know they've got a problem, but they don't know where to go. And so having those willing partners was folks that are willing to raise their hand and say, can we do something? Yeah.
Well, that ends our canned questioning, so now it's your turn. If you have questions that you would like to ask any of these panelists, I would be glad to have that happen now.
I have a very important question, I think.
Sure.
I have to scoot out, but thank you all for coming. This is very interesting, as I thought it would be. When Olivia was talking, and she was talking about funding in different areas to get funding. Now FEMA, if the town is quick enough to apply for FEMA funding, why, maybe you guys can answer this important question, why won't FEMA let you fix it so it is better rather than fixing it the way it was, because we're only going to give you the money if you fix it to exactly the way it was and not make it better? Does anybody know the answer to that question? Ron was shaking his head. Isn't that ridiculous? Okay. Are you guys all aware of that's what happens? FEMA won't let you make it better?
Right, they'll pay to put in the 48-inch culvert.
Exactly.
That was blown out. Yeah. Now, I will say, in some circumstances, we have been able to get other grant money to say, okay, FEMA, we're going to put in a 48-incher, give us the money, and then we go find the other money to put in twice that size.
Right.
They don't like it, right? Which makes even less sense, because we're not asking them to do anything other than what they would normally do. But because we're putting in a big culvert and using them, like, it rankles their feathers. Can I explain it? No.
All right.
But if you run into that situation, reach out, because it's possible, right, if the situation is right, that there could be other grant funds that would allow it to be upsized.
So using the FEMA money as a match, sort of.
So
Leverage.
that first project that you spoke about, the first question that the culverts they put in, was there any, you talked about like all this funding came from different places. Was there any FEMA money for that? Because that's from Irene.
It wasn't FEMA money, it was ARPA money. There was federal money that was flood resiliency funds,
Oh, okay.
but it wasn't FEMA.
But-
I generally try to avoid FEMA funding if I can, because it's a hassle.
So it's a big hassle.
Next
No
question.
offense to FEMA.
Next question. Anyone else? John?
So what I'm hearing, that the solution is bigger culverts, but that's not the problem. The problem starts upstream. And I'd like to address the water capture where it falls and prevent that use of a bigger culvert or use of, big catastrophe. I'm a big promoter of water retention microstructures, which is a check dam, but I don't like to use the word dam because of connotations of it. But it's a very small wooden, made of logs, hand shovels, local vegetation to slow the water down, typically used to prevent erosion, either in a swale that's dry that would have water run off in a heavy rain there, a snow melt, or a small stream. My wife was involved with a hydrologist from Slovakia, who recognized for the effort that he did in this country to retain the water where it fell, to rehydrate it, a large portion of the country that was under the threat of drying up, agriculture failed, and the solution is to be a big water retention dam for water. It's going to flood 5 communities. You got 10,000 people to build 100,000 of these small microstructures and rehydrate the soil to the effect that a large rain event happened within 2 years of when he had 10% of it complete, and they didn't have erosion problems like the rest of the country did. Agriculture survived everything, and everything is greener. So the big effects of doing small projects in the property owner's backyard, whether it's a rain barrel capturing water, not letting that water run down your driveway to a storm drain, has tremendous effects. In a larger community, we working with Sullivan County Conservation District to do micro check dams or microstructures. The golf course, they have a stream running through courses of road, and it's also fed by stormwater that's running to a city culvert. And I'd say 70% of the flows from the city water streams. And so how can we slow that down and maybe put an infiltration area in the wooded area that'll help soak it in on a large rain event? Like we had 3 inches of rain one afternoon. The water's running down their driveway to Maple Avenue with silts everywhere. If you can slow it down and let it soak in a little bit, it's so much easier to do it in a rural area where you have forest and woods and places to let it soak in. It can be done with E.J. Prescott's technology. They do a wonderful job. Amazing what they put under large commercial parking lots in the middle of Boston to get the water into the grounds. But we can do it in a very affordable way, and we're trying to do this demonstration project. So stay tuned, but I'm encouraging how can we get through some of the bureaucracy to not have to do all the permitting so that a farmer, a homeowner can make a small scale water retention project without going through a ton of paperwork and just throwing it in your hands.
Thank you, John.
Can I piggyback on that, John? So I try to retain water because I don't have to irrigate it, which means I don't have to put, in some fields I have to put an actual device out to pull the hose out and let it retract and then put it away. Burn gas to run the pump to push it far enough. The other is you promote deeper root growth, and you get deeper root growth, you get better water retention in the plant, and you don't have to irrigate as often. So I do some mechanical things, and there's just a few times that are over on the tables when you walk around. One of them is 12 inches long. So, and that has really improved the ability for our fields just to soak up that water. And in the middle of April, I think it was mid-April, maybe early April, we had the rain started, and it was a 2.5 inch or a 3 inch storm. And area of one of the fields that I refer to as the back 40, I said, I'm going to go back and see how that is working out. We aerated that field in late November, and walking out there, I could actually hear the water draining through those tine holes. The soil had not healed over, and you can still see them. So those are things that are just localized. It stays right here. But granted, it's going 2 feet down to the water table, and it's going to hang there or go to the river if it is saturated. But right.
At a much slower pace.
Yes.
Much slower.
Right.
Another thing that folks are starting to do, analog beaver dams.
Yes.
So exactly what he's talking about is slowing down the water in valleys, right? We're not talking about steep streams, but in fairly, flat areas, going in and actually building by hand a, quote, beaver dam to help back up the water, and especially in a high flow area where you have space for a wetland, to be temporarily created. So you can't do it everywhere, but it's the last couple of years, it's a fairly new thing that in New England we've started to do. States and federal agencies are starting to fund it. Strategic Wood Addition is another one where we're cutting trees out of the forest and dragging them over to the stream and building these check dams essentially. And they help catch sediment, they help, catch high water. Fish, frogs can still get through all of those things. They're not a dam because there's still nooks and crannies and, and water still does go through.
Yep.
But, so again, I think it's a sort of one of those silver lining things of, like in the last 10 years, this stuff's starting to happen now. you know, it's fairly small scale, but maybe 10 years from now, there'll be more and more of them, and it will start to lead to some, I never want to say we're going to prevent flooding, right? That's not possible, but less damage. You know, that's the goal.
I'm just red flagging, thinking about what John said about the regulatory intervention. When you start blocking
Everything requires
big,
permits.
extreme stuff, then you're talking about some major permitting
Yeah.
obstacles to overcome, and that seems self-defeating.
Now, I'll say this, because I work in all 4 states, right? Connecticut, Mass, Vermont, New Hampshire. It's not that bad in New Hampshire. If you were in Mass, you'd be pulling your hair out. And in Vermont, for example, we have to go get a state permit, a local permit, a state permit, and a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit. At least here in New Hampshire, it's all one process, right? So it's not as bad as you might think.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Olivia, I think my job is done. It's over to you now.
Thank you for all of you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
So if people want to take a 2-minute stretch while we get Lisa set up with her slideshow and audio, dive into some specific strategies.
And so you look at instead of planting trees, they're going out and talking to the state across the industry. And then they're branches out.
Yes. I don't think we should. I don't, personally.
Okay, we're going to come back together. Really excited to partner with Lisa Loosigian from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, Soak Up the Rain, New Hampshire, on this series of events. Really brings a lot of knowledge of what you can do at the residential scale. So I'm going to let her take it away and do her thing. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I've never used a microphone before, so maybe it's slightly awkward for me, but just bear with me. As Olivia said, my name's Lisa Loosigian. I'm the program manager for Soak Up the Rain, and it is a DES program, so I work for the state of New Hampshire. Go ahead. Olivia's going to click through the slides for me. Just go ahead. No, just.
Sorry.
So we talked about this term already, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Stormwater runoff is water from rain or melting snow that doesn't soak in. So if it doesn't soak in, it runs off. And a lot of people use some different terms. They use the term stormwater, but I like to try to always use runoff because that's so descriptive for me. It's the water that runs off. It says it all right there. So go ahead. And we talked about what's going on at the municipal level and on larger scale, but we can look at ourselves in our own homes and think about what am I contributing to this runoff problem and how. So you click a couple of times. And the term impervious surface we heard too, which are this hard surfaces that don't let water soak in. So our roofs are impervious. Our driveways are impervious, even if they're gravel. As you know, if you have a gravel driveway and it rains, the water runs right off of it. Even our lawns over time can become compacted. UNH estimates that after about 10 years of regular use, walking on it just to mow it, fertilize, kids playing around it, the dog on it, the first inch or so becomes compacted. And in heavier rains especially, you can see your lawn acting like your driveway. So those are the sources of runoff from our homes, and as Olivia and others mentioned, it's not just the water itself, but it's what it carries with it. You can pick up if you fertilize a little too much or too often or right before it rains, or bacteria from your dog if you don't pick up after it. Stuff like that can come with that runoff and pollute the water body when it finally gets there. And of course, you know, we care because it ends up in those water bodies. If it doesn't soak in, it runs off. Go ahead. And not to talk about watersheds again, but really wherever you live in the watershed, a lot of these practices that you'll see that I'm going to talk about, a lot of them are happening on the shore of a lake or a pond, because that's who we work with through the Soak Up the Rain program. Lake associations, watershed associations reach out to us, and we go and do a presentation like this. They sign up for site visits. We go around and we make recommendations. And a lot of the people that are interested are the people that are on the pond seeing those cyanobacteria blooms. I'm sure some of you have heard of those, where algae that's in their bacteria, really, that's in the water in safe quantities gets fertilized by fertilizer washing off, or sediments that release nutrients into the water, and you have these blooms. So these people are seeing that and they want to do something about it. So that's why we work with a lot of people that live right on the water body. But pardon me, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat, so I have a lozenge. So pardon me if I'm a little mumbly. But even if you live way up in the watershed, the water still can get to a brook or into a drainage system, like a catch basin, into a pipe system, and dump into that water body. So, okay. And we have this guide. This is how our program started. We created, there was interest. People are getting in touch with the state saying, what can I do at my home? So we created this homeowner's guide to stormwater management. It's a DIY, do-it-yourself guide, step-by-step instructions. And we didn't want it to just sit on the shelf. We wanted to get it out there into the community. So we developed our New Hampshire Soak Up the Rain program. There is a EPA has Soak Up the Rain program. Other states have Soak Up the Rain programs. And each, they run it the way that works for them. So the way we run our program is by me coming out, talking to people into lake and watershed associations, and then, like I said, making recommendations and sometimes helping them implement a practice or two. Invite the other watershed association members and neighbors to say, see what we're doing? You could go home and do this at your property. So, and I used to just bring like a box of these to every presentation I did, and people would just take them, but now they cost almost $8 each to print. So I still bring them. I still say your tax dollars paid for these. You can have one if you want. But on the flip side of that, I'm trying to be responsible with the tax dollars and the trees that it takes and the printing and everything else. So if you want one, you can certainly have one, especially if you want to put one at your town library or the town office, or have someplace where the public can see it. Or if you want one for your own self, that's fine. It's also available in its entirety online, and the individual step-by-step instructions from 10 different practices are available to print as individual PDFs. So there you have it. And while I mentioned, we also have a website, but that is going to change soon. If you pick up a flyer, there's a URL on the back, but that URL will change soon. So if you're looking for our program, just do an online search for Soak Up the Rain New Hampshire and you'll find us. So go ahead, please. So let's get into these stormwater solutions, because there are things that people can do at home and on smaller properties. They've already been touched on by other presenters tonight. So go ahead. Things like a simple drip line trench, so that when water is dripping off your roof line, instead of it running down your driveway or eroding underneath there and running off and bringing those sediments in the water to the water body, you capture it in the drip line. And we tried to be really thoughtful when we developed this, taking guidance and ideas from others that were doing these types of practices. So, for example, in this one, you can see the bottom of the trench is angled away from the building, so that you're directing water toward the lawn, not toward the building or the driveway. And perhaps if you have a basement, you don't want to do one of these, because you could be introducing water that will then seep into your basement and cause a different kind of problem. So we tried to put all those types of guidance and those thoughts behind these practices. So here's an example of one. The drip line before was loosening sediment, and it was coming right through. This is on Nipple Lake in Barrington, coming right through a very short beach area and bringing all that material into the lake. So they did a drip line trench, so now the water stays right there and prevented that erosion through the beach as well. Similarly, a driveway infiltration trench, the water is directed into the trench instead of down the driveway. Again, angle the bottom away from it so you're not trying to put water under your driveway. And these are very adaptable. I'll show you a project that we did up at Phillips Exeter Academy. We worked with the students to show them these types of practices. So if you'll click again, in this case, rather than the water running off the driveway onto the road, it was running from the road onto the driveway. And so, eroding the yard here, going down that hill, and at the bottom of the hill there's a catch basin and the Squamscott River. So all that material is moving into the river. So we worked with the students to build these driveway infiltration trenches, so when the water comes on the driveway, it goes in and stays there. You can also see there's a rain garden there that we built with them and the grounds people to capture the roof runoff from the building. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Good old-fashioned dry well. I often call these types of practices different shapes and sizes of holes in the ground filled with stone. And a dry well is your classic hole in the ground filled with stone. So you dig a hole, you line the sides with landscape fabric to prevent fine materials from coming in and moving into the stone-filled dry well, and fill it up with stone and direct your water into it so it can slowly soak into the ground. So that's what we've been talking about all night, is getting that water to soak in so we help reduce the flooding and the water pollution. And you can, well, go ahead and click and I'll show you the next one. So this was a case we worked with the Great Bay stewards and did some practices around Great Bay. Again, water was coming off the road onto this driveway, and there was a gutter from the garage, and all that was going into this grate next to the driveway. And it's hard to see, but there's a pipe there. It was piping it into this pond that fed into the bay. So we worked with the homeowner to build a dry well. And when it was all done, we looked at it, and we were proud of ourselves there, but we looked at it and we said, well, there's a square of stone in their yard. I wonder if we could, you know, it's maybe not the most attractive thing. So we have discovered that you can bury these dry wells. About 6 inches down or so, you can put a layer of landscape fabric, put some soil, and let grass grow on top of it or other plants, so you can kind of hide it. And if you were to, if there was a garden here next to the garage, you could incorporate that into the garden area, maybe plant some natives, and then you're doing some of those co-benefits, as Olivia was saying, by having native plants that provide habitat and resources for pollinators. So we worked all those things into this version of the homeowner guide too, how to incorporate vegetation into these practices wherever they can be, because we talked about the benefits of vegetation. It creates the root systems that make pore spaces that help the water infiltrate, and we all know plants are good for us and the environment. Infiltration steps are really great on sloped paths that help reduce runoff and erosion. If you go ahead and click. This is a set of infiltration steps that was installed at a pond in Loudon where water was coming from the driveway and the lawn, which was compacted, and moving along through this path. I think there were old steps there. You can see some old timbers. So they put a drip line, a driveway infiltration trench to take some of the driveway runoff, and then we help them build these infiltration steps, which are just sets of steps filled with timbers and backfilled with clean drainage stone. And if you do any of these things, it's important to use clean stone. If you get, there's some terminology that is used in different ways by different people, but what you want is clean drainage stone, so it's not that crushed stone that has fine material in it, because that will clog up your pore space. You want air in between the stone for the water to move through. And while we were talking about lawns, I learned at the last one, we did one of these on Saturday, and the Conservation District person, it was the Merrimack County Conservation District, representative that mentioned that when lawns do get compacted, they let people borrow, they're called broad forks. They're these big forks. They're used to break up soil. Farmers use them, but she said people borrow them to re-aerate their lawns. You just go through and poke it, basically, to make holes to re-aerate your lawn to help it infiltrate water rather than run off. Go ahead. And as I mentioned, they're adaptable to your situation. In this particular case, water was coming from a parking area in the foreground and moving right through here, and that's the lake in the background. So they built this one big step or landing. It looks like a landing at the bottom of their porch steps, but it's really a functional infiltration device for that water that's coming off of their parking area. Pervious walkways and patios. Most of these practices that we've talked about so far, and the rest of them are fairly simple. This is a little more involved. It's when you have a stone reservoir underneath a walkway or a patio or a driveway, so that water can move through it and get into the stone that's underneath to infiltrate. We've never done one of these with a project partner, but I have a couple of photos of things. So there you can see the stone subbase where he's standing, and then the pavers go on top, and the pavers have those little tabs on them for good spacing. And then you either don't grout it at all, or you grout it with something that's permeable, or like pea stone, so the water can move off the pavers and go through the pea stone to get into that subbase. And yes, these things do need maintenance. People say, well, that's going to clog up over time. And yes, it will. Like any other system or practice or component of your house or yard, it will need maintenance. So we included all those maintenance ideas in the guide as well. Somebody earlier mentioned something similar to this. I think it was Zach, the cells that they put asphalt in, which I had never heard of before. I was really encouraged to hear some of the new innovative practices that are happening at a larger scale. These are great for like overflow parking, or even a boat to stabilize a boat ramp on the shore, where you have a grid system that you can fill with stone, or in this case maybe some soil and get grass over it, so the water moves in there and moves through. Lots of ideas around those papers. Somebody mentioned the rain garden earlier, which I call a hole in the ground filled with plants. You dig a hole, you make it flat, you put plants in it, and you direct the water into it. So if you click through, that's the key feature to a rain garden. It's called the ponding area. The top line is the original grade, and the bottom dashed line is now the top of the rain garden. So when it rains, in this case, it's showing that a roof runoff being directed into the rain garden, so it pools up in there, and it's meant to. And the plants that we recommend you put in there are made to tolerate that. We do have a rain garden plant list that we developed with the University of New Hampshire. And then when the sun comes out, it slowly soaks in to the ground. And rain gardens can be very, very versatile. They're not just for roofs. You can put them in the middle of a lawn. As I mentioned, if you have a compacted lawn and water sheet flows over it, you can interrupt it with a rain garden, so it dumps in there and it soaks in. You can do it off a patio. And also, if you look at guidance for rain gardens, it will tell you how to size it. It will tell you to measure your roof area, for example, and test your soil. And now you need a rain garden this big. And maybe you look at your spot and you say, I don't have enough room to do one this big. Well, do one a little smaller. Do whatever you can. It will take the water, it will just overflow a little more often. What's embedded in a lot of the guidance for sizing rain gardens is 1 inch of rain falling on an impervious surface. So 1 inch of rain falling on your particular roof section. So maybe you'll capture all the storms that are up to a ½ inch instead of 1 inch. Or maybe the rain garden will function better than you think it will, and it will capture those 1 inch storms before it overflows. So if you're into gardening, they're a great they're a wonderful landscape feature too. So let's move on so we don't spend too much time. So here's an example that we did again with the Great Bay Stewards out on the coast, where water, and we talked a lot about tonight, like water flowing off of somebody's property onto another person's, or off the road onto people's property, which is a big area of contention. Whenever we go out and do recommendations, there's always somebody that says, the water's coming off the state road or the town road onto my property, and look what it's doing, and they won't fix it. They say it's our problem, but it's their road. And so there is a big disconnect there, and as Ron was saying, there's not a lot of funding for that sort of thing, so it is an area that needs some help. In this case, the water was coming from the neighborhood behind here onto this property and then onto their driveway and down toward Great Bay. So we worked with the project partners with the Great Bay Stewards and put a rain garden in. That blue line is where the water was coming in from the neighbors, and it's hard to see here, but that's what we call the inlet. So you armor it, you line it with stone to protect where it's coming in so it doesn't erode itself. And there's always an outlet that's built purposefully in a rain garden for when they overflow. So, yeah, and then a good old-fashioned rain barrel. We talked about those earlier. The thing about rain barrels is they fill up really quickly, so people have done a lot of different ways to deal with that. Like you can split your gutter system. If your gutter on the front or back of your house is going to one corner, you can split, the pitch so it goes to each corner, and that's what these folks did here in Greenland. People also daisy chain them together so that when one fills up, the overflow pipe at the top will go into the next one. A lot of people are buying cisterns now instead of rain barrels because they're bigger. It's just a bigger barrel for more storage. And of course, they're not an infiltration device themselves. It's however you use the water is when it gets infiltrated. Go ahead. Yes. Water bars are great practices to use on pathways or driveways. You see them also on hiking trails, just to push the water off the path into a vegetated area, and for making, to keep the path in good shape, but also to reduce runoff and erosion. So if you click. This is an example of a project that we did up in Freedom with the Green Mountain Conservation Group at one of the camps on Lake Ossipee. This was a camp, and the campers helped us do this. They were really into it. Water from the lodging in the foreground was making these big gullies through here. They were pretty deep. So the Green Mountain folks wanted to work with the campers and do something here. So this was a really cool project because the kids were much more into it than the camp counselors thought they might be. Some of them came back after lunch to finish it, even though they didn't need to. We heard them educating each other about why they were doing it. So it's just very heartening to have that next generation hearing this stuff. So if you'll click, we can see the result. So the water bars are just buried 6x6 timbers that are fastened into the ground and set at an angle. And there's a stone trench behind each one. So the water comes and it hits that, it goes into the trench, and the timber moves it along into the shrubby area over on the side where it can soak in and not erode this area, this pathway. And there's a really cool type of water bar that a lot of lake associations are doing right now, and they're applicable anywhere, but it's called a rubber razor. They're sourcing used conveyor belt material, and you sandwich it between lumber. You have some of the conveyor belt material sticking up so that, again, the water comes down. These blue arrows are, of course, depicting the water coming down the driveway. And again, behind that rubber razor where it's buried there in the middle picture, there's a stone trench. So the water comes down and moves into the trench, and the buried lumber moves it off. And the rubber razor that's sticking up is, stopping the water, but you can drive over them. So they use them a lot on camp roads and gravel driveways. Of course, if you're going to plow a driveway like this, the plow operator needs to know it's there because they can be ripped up really easy with a plow. But a great just a great, simple, low-cost device for helping to soak up the rain, move it off somewhere where it can soak in. Okay. Somebody mentioned earlier vegetated swales, a shallow channel filled with plants to slow the flow. And this is a beautiful depiction of a very robust vegetated swale, but for a homeowner scale, this may not, a lot of time these swales that are between the driveway culverts are in the right of way, actually, and not owned by the homeowner, which most towns and cities, you can work in them, but a lot of people don't want to invest that kind of money into it. So I'll show you an example. In my neighborhood, I saw this, walking on the same street. One of my neighbors, I don't know why, I think it's illegal, but I hesitate to turn him in. He gouges out the swale between his driveway culvert and the catch basin. And all that loosened material, of course, is filling up that sump that we mentioned earlier. And once it's filled, that water with all the sediment will move on to the pond where it dumps out. I don't know why he does it. I think he thinks he's helping, but right up the street, there's this, grass, a swale that grass is growing in and clover is growing in. It's not full of beautiful, amazing plants, but that grass and the clover will help slow some of the water, especially in those smaller storms. Obviously the channel itself is just protected. All that sand and sediment and soil can't move off because it's not exposed. So, and check dams, somebody mentioned earlier too. Just piling up rocks or branches or whatever you have around to let water build up behind those dams so it slows down for a minute, drops the sediments out of it, and some of it soaks in right behind those dams. There's a flyer on one of the tables that shows a picture of an actual check dam, not a silly drawing like I've done. So I would tell you to check that out. And let's see, I think we mentioned vegetated buffers, especially if you live on a lake or a pond or a river. Any vegetation between where your house or your yard and the water body does a lot of good in terms of stormwater management, slowing it down, protecting the shore from eroding. And this one on the left had left their buffer, this one on the right realized they needed to do it and they planted it. So there's, or you can do a hybrid, you plant a little, you let some stuff grow in, you stop mowing. But as we talked about earlier too, anywhere that you can let vegetation grow, you're doing a great benefit for the environment and the stormwater runoff. Especially if they're native plants, they need such little inputs. They don't need to be fertilized. You're not spending time and money and burning fossil fuels to mow it. You're providing habitat. You're slowing down the flow. When water hits these types of plants, a lot of it is intercepted. It never even hits the ground. It just gets caught up in the plant and in the leaf matter and ends up evaporating. So maintaining natural areas or building vegetated areas, especially with native vegetation, is a really great practice to do. I think that's, so I say if you can't build something, you can do something or not do something. So for example, just good lawn care, and again, these are all in the guide and online, just called good housekeeping tips, things you can do like keeping your septic system in good working order, or there's a section on green yard care and landscaping, things like having your soil tested to see if you actually need to fertilize. UNH Extension, if you send a soil sample into them, they'll tell you actually low, medium, and high maintenance lawn what you need to do. So if you want a big lush green lawn, you'll have a high maintenance lawn, so fertilize this much. But if you're like me, and I have a yard, not a lawn, but I had one area that wouldn't grow anything, so I sent my soil in and they gave me a low maintenance suggestions for beefing up the soil a little bit. And using a meter to find a moisture meter, so you're not watering your lawn just by rote. Does it really need to be watered or not? You click a couple of times, I think I said all those those things. And mowing to no less than 3 inches is another guidance that is given out for keeping your lawns in good shape and helping them to be functional rather than just ornamental. And I think that's, oh, okay, so we have a really robust web page for Soak Up the Rain. We have, as I mentioned, all those step-by-step instructions. We have photo galleries of these projects that I've mentioned that we worked with people, or people did on their own, and they sent us some photos. So you can see a photo succession of a project going in. We have a whole page for rain garden planning, plant list, and other resources for rain gardens and property assessment tools. So there's lots of good resources there on that page. I think that was my last slide, I believe, yeah. So, as I mentioned, the website is going to change, but will be easy enough to find with a search. And then, so if there are any questions for me, I'm happy to try to answer them. Yes?
Lisa, so it's a state program. Is there state funding that helps with this, or is it technical?
It's technical assistance. We did back when we first started this program, we were offering small grants. That's how we did 10 projects with the Great Bay Stewards. They had a very small amount of money and we helped them, but just didn't quite work the way we wanted to in the grant program. So right now it's mostly technical assistance. Yes, but thank you for asking. Yes.
Did you have a program last fall in Keene to maybe rain barrels, was it, or something? You had a project in the Keene area.
Let me think for a minute. We did a landscaper training in Swansea. Maybe that's what you were thinking of?
Maybe rain gardens, maybe it was rain gardens, a workshop. You encouraged individual people to participate. You had some funding for that. No? Not. Okay.
No,
I thought
maybe.
it was Soak Up the Rain.
Yeah. No, not us. But we we also work with UNH to do landscaper trainings. We've done, I think, 5 or 6 of them now. They're 2-day workshops. We did one in Swansea last year. We usually do them every other year, but this year we're doing one again at the Lake Sunapee Protective Association at their Center for Something Studies in April. So if you know any landscapers or land managers that would be interested in that type of training, let them know. There's no information anywhere yet. We just have to save the date. It's April 4th and 5th, but once we get our websites running, there'll be more information on that. So, yeah. All right, well, if you think of a question later and you want to send me an email, you can find me on the Soak Up the Rain website or get in touch with me however you can. Find me or through Olivia, whatever you like. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. That wraps up our speakers for the night, but we have, if you have any questions or just want to chat about the issue or anything, I think a lot of us are sticking around at least for another 30 minutes or so. So there's plenty of pizza and drinks, so please enjoy and thank you for coming and sharing your time with us.